you work your whole life to get to that moment. And for some of these girls to have that moment taken away by a biological male is not fair, and it's not just at all. And a lot of people say no matter how hard women, train, they can get up to where a man's talent level is. It's not possible. No matter how much a woman trains, will they ever reach the same biological comparison as a man? What's up, and welcome back to Gen Z Unplugged. Today we have a fun episode here with Hannah Faulkner, another co-host of our podcast, and we will be speaking on women's sports and what is going on in the news that you're probably seeing everywhere about Title IX.
Yeah, the big thing right now, as you all probably know, is the Supreme Court cases that they just heard oral arguments for. And some of our staff was actually there at the rally outside the Supreme Court with so many people. There was girls from all across the country, and we heard from people like Riley Gaines, Mike Johnson, and so many people from around the country. Girls had been rallying all day. They got there very early in the morning and were all outside the Supreme Court, and it was just a very cool experience to be there and be with them standing up for women's rights and women's sports. And according to One American News Network, the Supreme Court appears poised to uphold state laws banning transgender athletes from girls and women's sports following the oral arguments in the cases from West Virginia and Idaho. A decision is to be expected by late June or early July. So things are looking up right now.
Man, I have to say, I first off, I'm so excited to be with you guys today and to be able to talk about this. It's wild that we're even here in 2026. I almost said 2025, but 2026, and we are still arguing the fact of whether or not men should be allowed to compete against women, should be allowed in our spaces, in our locker rooms. We have Supreme Court justices, we have politicians and leaders of this country who are denying basic biology. And all of us are females. All of us are, women. And I'm not sure about you guys. We're Gen Z. We're all Christians. We're conservatives. But it just blows my mind every single day that these are even topics of discussion.
Yeah, exactly. So we want to give you guys a little bit of history of what even Title IX is, if you're not familiar with it. Title IX is a federal law that was written in 1972, and it prohibits discrimination based on sex in education programs and activities that receive federal financial assistance. So like public schools, for example. Title IX states that no person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. All federal agencies that provide grants of financial assistance are required to enforce Title IX's non-discrimination mandate, gives grants of financial assistance to schools and colleges and to certain other entities. Examples of this type of discrimination that are covered with Title IX are like sex-based harassment, sexual violence, pregnancy discrimination, the failure to provide equal athletic opportunities, sex-based discrimination in school science, technology, engineering, math, courses, programs, classes, things like that. So that is what Title IX is. And Title IX, I was a college athlete as well as Rachel. And before we started, we had to sign a Title IX agreement. But a lot of people that we are seeing now use it as a weapon for liberal ideology, like allowing men in women's sports, and seeing that sex-based discrimination, equal opportunity is being treated like gender equality in every space. And we see that with the Biden administration, and specifically in 2024, when he actually added new language into Title IX to allow men to be in women's sports and to make it more legalized. So now we see that trying to be reverted back to the original language, which is where it stemmed from.
Yeah, I think the biggest issue, like you said, you touched on this, is that they are trying to weaponize Title IX now. And in this weaponization, they're trying to use that language and be like, oh, so we're not discriminating against biological males in women's sports, so that's discriminating if we tell them that they can't go into women's sports. And then not only that, they're fighting for that, and then they're also saying that no one will be harmed if a boy plays in girl sports. And now we know that there's so many girls that have come out. Hannah, I know you have some stats on this too. So many girls that have come out and, you know, they're being on the news now, they're speaking up. And Hannah, you said that if one person is harmed by this, then that's too many.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I actually was on a debate on Newsmax a couple months ago when President Trump signed the executive order saying no men in women's sports. And they said, you know, this isn't happening very often. This is not a big deal. And frankly, it is a big deal, even if it is just one person being harmed or one young girl being stripped of that opportunity in that space. And I think this goes beyond even young women being stripped of their opportunities or losing out on scholarships. This is the fact that we as a society, as a culture, are denying basic reality, are denying scientific truth. And so, of course, the scholarships and the opportunities, it's unfortunate. But what's even more unfortunate is that we have leaders, that we have pastors, and that we have a movement that are advocating for what you guys just said. They're trying to rewrite Title IX to where it's not based on biological sex, but rather your gender identity and what you may think you are. And now that's why, I mean, we've had podcasts talking about this, where you have people thinking they are animals. They are thinking that they are, Z, zer, or whatever the latest pronoun is. And so when you start giving an inch, to denial of basic reality that the sky is blue and the grass is green, the limits of that insanity are endless. And there is no stopping point when you start denying again, basic reality that the sky is blue, the grass is green, and men cannot become women, and vice versa. And so, yeah, it's really heartbreaking that we're here. Actually, you mentioned not only are they losing opportunities, scholarships, or we're having to walk into the bathroom to find a man there, but you have young girls who are physically being harmed by this. Peyton McNabb, she was a volleyball player in high school from South Carolina. She actually spoke at the rally yesterday at the Supreme Court. And when she was in high school, she was forced to compete in a volleyball tournament against a dude who thought he was a woman. And he spiked the ball so hard in her face that it has left her partially paralyzed on her right side, to where she has to go in for physical exams constantly. It has affected her academics. It has affected her mental state because, again, this is a traumatizing event that has happened to her simply because the coaches, the NCAA, because those that are above her that were leading the sports tournaments refused to say, you are a dude and you should not be allowed to compete against women. So as you guys said, this is not only stripping these young girls of opportunities, scholarships, but this is physically harming countless women across the country because we are denying basic reality.
Totally agree. And I think what you hit on there was that we have people in positions of authority that are saying this. Like, we have school leadership, I think is, one point of it. But we also have people like justices who come out and say, well, Title IX could be used to say that from birth what their gender was, but what they are currently now. And I think that you mentioned you have a quote from her that just blows my mind.
Yeah, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, which I have a hard time calling her a Supreme Court justice because, again, she denies reality that men can't become women. This is the same justice who said she can't define what a woman is to Senator Blackburn because she's not a biologist. This is also the same justice who said banning the chemical castration of children is like banning interracial marriage. So this woman is pretty insane and is totally off her rocker. But she said yesterday during the oral arguments, she said, we are now looking at the definition of a girl and we're saying only people who were girl assigned at birth qualify. Again, this is the highest court of our land. Like these are the highest of those in authority. They are a part of the judicial system. They are the highest justices, judges, and this is the kind of language they're using. We're looking at the definition of a girl, and we're now saying only people who were girl assigned at birth qualify, which is what she's saying is that they want to include people who identify as a girl to be allowed in women's bathrooms or women's spaces. So yeah, I mean, that's just one sentence. There are so many sentences, so many statements that were made by Sotomayor and Ketanji Brown Jackson specifically that it blows your mind that we're even having this conversation, and that the highest those in authority at the highest law court of our land are making these kinds of statements to the American people.
Yeah, exactly. It was so funny to me. It was beautiful to see, but when President Trump came out and declared that there are two genders, male and female, that was wild that we have come to this point. But it was so amazing to hear him say that. But it was just a surprise. And, you know, people were so on social media, so happy that, you know, we've come to this decision, things like that. But it's hysterical in a way, because we have to declare, the president of the United States has to declare that there are only two genders, male and female. Like what you said, it's just wild that some people think that, you know, there's more than two. But.
Yeah, absolutely. It's wild. Rachel, I want to know your thoughts on this, because wait, what sport did you play when you were growing up?
I ran cross country and track basically all the way ever since I was in 4th grade. I hated it in the beginning, but then I ended up loving it, and I did it through college and all that. And so it really breaks my heart, because there is a lot, especially of track athletes. I see it all over social media where they're on the podium and there is a guy there, and then they wait and the guy goes off, and then the woman steps up to the first place section on the tier. But it breaks my heart when I see that, because that was my sport that I grew up and I know and love it. And especially for that, there is like, I can 100% kind of sort of weigh into this, because the men and women, even just our training was so different in college. The way the coach treated, or the way the coach trained the boys versus the way he trained the girls, like it's a whole different sphere, whether you're a man or a woman. And there's different events for some of them too. And it's very different. And there's a huge biological difference. The times can range from minutes to, and then some of the shorter sprints, seconds are everything. So the fact that boys are getting 5 seconds faster than the girls in certain shorter races is just huge. So then it's just, like you were saying, it's just ridiculous when there's a boy in the race and it's even so obvious that he's beating the girls by so many seconds, and they're falling behind. And it almost is like, it would have done him better to even slow down a little bit so it wouldn't be as obvious. But here we are when it's like ridiculously obvious, where there's a humongous advantage. So
yeah. And even in college, like playing basketball, women are so impressive. They work their whole life, like you said. They're strong, they go to the gym, they work out, they give their life to this. And I was born basically playing basketball, and you work your whole life to get to that moment. And for some of these girls to have that moment taken away by a biological male is not fair, and it's not just at all. And a lot of people say, no matter how hard women, train, they can get up to where a man's talent level is. It's not possible. No matter how much a woman trains, will they ever reach the same biological comparison as a man?
Yeah, and I think it's important. A lot of people, we talk about what's happening today, and we talk about the Supreme Court cases and the oral arguments that were heard yesterday. And obviously, we are very excited. I think that the American people as a whole, I believe there was a poll showing that 80% of Americans believe men should not be allowed in women's sports. So this is a very principled idea. While that there even is 20% or whatever that number may be that think that men should be allowed in women's spaces. And I don't think that it's necessarily a coincidence, because this indoctrination, this desensitization that men can become women, or you can be whoever you feel that you are one day, it doesn't just happen overnight. And we've seen this happen for several decades at this point. And we can talk about, obviously, any wave of the feminist movement, but specifically the sexual revolution, which is like that third and fourth wave of feminism that we really start to see permeating society after Betty Friedman wrote The Feminine Mystique and was criticizing the traditional family. And then it led into this idea of, well, you should be able to sleep around with whoever you want, wherever you want. And then we have SECUS, which is the Sexual Education Council, which I believe started in like the 80s and 90s, where they were advocating for sex education in schools. And it wasn't just sexual education of basic anatomy. No, this was very explicit. And it actually started out in California, Ironically, that was one of the first states that started implementing sex education that was more opposed to abstinence-only programs. And within the sex education was things like gender ideology and this notion that male and female is just a social construct. Therefore, it will just conform to the public's opinion of that time. It's almost like relativism, essentially. Whatever is relative to the moment, that's what your culture and your society is going to appeal to. And so if we've been pushing this idea of male and female is not objective, it's a social construct, it's relative, right? Who cares who you are? Who cares what you identify as? Well, of course. I mean, that's 30 years ago, at least 30 years ago at this point. And now we're looking in 2026 where we are facing this issue head on. And a lot of this started to come to light during COVID-19. I think people doing school remotely and parents being able to see what their kids were actually learning, and then starting to see what's in these Netflix shows and what the educational system, I think, Catherine, you mentioned this, and that the educational system, what I like to call the indoctrination camps at this point, what they have been propagating for a long time. And then in 2022, you start to see Riley Gaines' story start to blow up. And Paula Scanlon, who was a teammate of William Thomas at the University of Pennsylvania, and the fact that she was forced to undress with William Thomas 18 times per week. And then you get stories like Peyton McNabb, the girl that's partially paralyzed because of a male player who identified as a woman. We start to get all of these stories, and people are wondering how in the world we got here. Well, then you just pull back the layers 30 years ago, and you start to realize that this kind of stuff does not happen overnight. This is a repeat of history when you start to confuse biological reality and objective truth. And we can say that, of course, this was God's design, that male and female were created in his image. But even further than that, like, this is just scientific truth. You don't have to be a Christian to recognize this. So I think it's important for people in the audience to understand how we got here, because we can't really solve the problems of our time unless we understand the root of it. And the root of it is confusing God's original design between man and woman, and that we are created differently with a purpose and for a purpose. And when you start to blur and confuse those lines, that is when you're going to see the problems. And I think that's ultimately why we're here even having to debate these two specific Supreme Court cases.
Yeah, I agree. And I love what you said about the education system, because that's where it's all starting. I had a great conversation with a teacher at a public school, first grade teacher, second grade teacher, who have seen this firsthand of what's going on in their education system in the public schools. And what they have to go through, what they have to hide, what they have to secretly take down and not let these students see, the books on their shelves that they're having to, make sure that none of them read, what first graders are already talking about in their classrooms, and how they're taking God out of everything. And it was just horrifying to hear, but it's such a positive thing, because now, it was a positive thing speaking to her, because they are doing so much in their power to make sure these students do not continue in the path that the, education, like you said, this indoctrination system has planned for them. They're doing something about it to make sure that these students do not grow up thinking that they are any gender that they want to be, and they can come to school in a dress if they're a man. So it's really great to see that they're not allowing this, and they're making sure that they know the truth. So it's so important for teachers nowadays to really stand up for what you believe. And I was just so happy to hear from a couple of the teachers I was speaking to that they were doing just that.
I think it's so interesting because obviously I'm very grateful for the work that Riley Gaines has been doing, what the Luce Center has been doing to combat this issue, of course, and the countless thousands of other young girls that showed up at the Supreme Court yesterday and said enough is enough. Like, we acknowledge the truth that you cannot become a woman just because you feel like it, and you do not need to be in our spaces, and you don't deserve to be in our locker rooms and our bathrooms. And I'm grateful for all of that. But 4 years ago, it was almost unheard of that a young girl was being forced to compete against a dude. That was almost like, what? Like, when people started to hear Riley Gaines' story, it was a shock to the nation. They couldn't fathom that their daughter may be forced to compete against a man, or that their wife would walk into the bathroom and see a dude who thought he was a woman in her bathroom or locker room, wherever it is. And now it's like it's hard to find someone who hasn't encountered a man in their bathroom, their locker room, their female space as a whole. And I'm like, yes, we're making headway. Yes, I'm so excited. But isn't it such a shame that 4 years ago, it was almost unheard of for a girl to be forced to compete against a man. And now it's unheard of to find someone who hasn't been forced to compete against a man or share a locker room or bathroom with them. So I don't know. It really is sad. It's heartbreaking that we've reached this point.
Yeah, I think to your point, it is very interesting that America, the best country on earth, is kind of facing this issue because we have, I think, as Americans and American citizens are obviously going through this and fighting this, it's interesting because our country is so built up. We have so much progress. We have big skyscrapers, a great military, all these things. And yet these are the kind of issues that we're facing. Because I heard an interview recently. It was from a while ago, but it recently came up recently. It was about, I think a reporter went to a third world country and kind of asked them about transgender ideology and how do they view it. And I think it was a smaller country in Africa. And I remember the person he was interviewing being like, "What is that? Like, what is that? Explain that to us." And he kind of explained it as like, "Oh, you think that you're different than the sex you were assigned at birth per se." And it was like the leader of the tribe was like, "We don't have that here. We have bigger problems to face." And it's almost like because Americans aren't struggling for certain material things, and it's like we have more time to worry about things that other countries don't even, like, they're worried about survival. And I think it's interesting that America has even gotten to this point from that angle as well.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of people that we see on social media, they're in this consumerism mindset where they want the next best thing. They're never happy with what they have. And so I think that kind of plays into this gender ideology problem that, people are going through because they're just not happy. They're not satisfied. No one's ever satisfied with what they've been given. And we see that with people, wanting to be a dog, wanting to be a cat, wanting to be a man if you're a female. No one is ever just okay or happy with what they have been given or with what they have in their life. I'm not saying this is everyone, obviously. This is just, but that could be a reason why we have this consumerism mindset. We're always wanting the next best thing. So that could play into people wanting, being a different gender is popular now. I want to be seen. I want to be heard. This is truly me, coming out with the next best thing. It's kind of like the consumerism mentality.
No, it definitely is. And I will say, I think we actually talked about this with Virginia Allen from, I think it's Daily Signal is who she works with, Daily Signal at the Heritage Foundation. Virginia Allen talked about this in one of the podcasts that Lauren and I did together, and the fact that you go to a lot of these other countries, like for instance, I've only been to one third world country. I've been to Israel several times, but only one third world country. And when I went there on a mission trip, again, like you said, with that interview that you saw, Rachel, these kinds of problems just don't exist. I mean, and they're fighting famine, hunger. They want fresh, clean water. They're fighting war zones. I mean, real world problems, and they don't have time to deal with men thinking they're women. Like, the men already know. They know they're a man. They've got big problems to fish. They want clean water that day. They want a meal that day. They don't have time to confuse their identity in their minds. And so I think a lot of times when you as a country or as a people or a society, you get very comfortable. And you start to forget how your country was so blessed. You start to forget where your country came from, what has made your country so great, and you start to get very complacent. And that is exactly, G.K. Chesterton said, tolerance is the virtue of a man with no conviction. And because we have tolerated sin inch by inch, we have tolerated immorality inch by inch, we've got very complacent with where we are. And one of my favorite quotes, I do not know who said this, but it's hard times make strong men. Strong men make good times. Good times make soft men, and soft men make hard times. And I think right now we are in the middle of soft men and hard times. And what we are seeing with the girls' sports issue should ultimately be a wake-up call to what is next. Are we going to have to fight the definition of pedophilia and what determines a pedophile? Because now the same movement that supports men and women's sports is also towing the line on this new phrase called MAPS, minor attracted persons. And so I think as conservatives, as Christians, but just common sense American citizens, this should be a wake-up call to stand now. We may never have a chance to stand for this republic and for common sense ever again.
Totally agree. And I'm also excited, though, with a lot of people that we saw at the rally who are there sticking up for truth, because they understand how this is so important. Because if we even let an inch or one more person be injured or even play against a biological male, we're allowing this to happen. So it's just a great thing. I think the pendulum's definitely swinging back to understanding fundamental truths, because once you get rid of that, you know, there's no moral code for everything. So I think understanding back and going back to tradition, going back to fundamental truths, going back to our faith is really important. And I think a lot of people are starting to understand that and see that. So I'm really excited for the next, 3 years of the Trump administration to see what else we kind of can revert back to fundamentally.
Yeah, and like you said, Hannah, I think the American public is definitely... this pendulum is switching. The American public is on our side on this. There are organizations and websites. I know SheWon.org has sort of an archive of all the girls that have suffered from this. They put out that 3,257 female athletes are affected by this. 4,627 medals have been lost, and 1,944 competitions have also been lost. So these are real statistics. These are real women. They have them, if you want to go look, for those who are listening, there are real names. 2024 golf, and then has the name and then what she lost. And yeah, it also has what she would have won. First place, second place, third place. It has all the stats here for all these different girls. And yeah, these are real statistics that were kind of being shown. And like you said, Hannah, it's a wake up call for society. And I know West Virginia and Idaho are definitely on board with protecting women's sports, and 25 states are also with them, wanting to stand up for women's sports. And the only thing that is in their way is these radical ideologies and these people that are kind of pushing back and have lost common sense. So the pendulum is switching, and the American public is on our side on this.
Yeah, well, and I just want to say this because I think I listen to myself and I listen to you guys. I sound a little bit more of a pessimist, and I feel that maybe those listening may not think that there's hope for the future after listening to what I had to say. And there is. There 100% is hope for the future, but that hope is in us. Like, that hope it starts with us, and it starts with us willing to say enough is enough. I want to be a change maker in our country. Enough with complaining. We can complain all day long. Getting on a podcast and complaining and talking about the problems of our world is easy, but showing up to the rallies, being willing to put yourself out there, to post the truth that men shouldn't be in women's sports on social media, having these hard conversations with your friends. And I know that Stella Morbido, the author of the Weaponization of Loneliness, says this often, and that they want you to feel like you're alone, that you're isolated, that there's nobody there standing with you. And so for the female athletes out there that are watching this, maybe you stumbled across this video, be encouraged to know that there are organizations, there are countless organizations. The Center for Conservative Women, they stand with you. They say enough is enough. They want to stand alongside of you as you fight to protect your space and your sport. So be encouraged. Truth will prevail ultimately in the end. And I'm so grateful to be standing alongside you guys. You, Rachel, and Catherine, as we fight for common sense again.
You're so right. And thank you so much, Hannah, for joining us virtually for our first virtual podcast episode, which is kind of exciting. So thank you so much for coming on with us today. And thank you to all of our listeners for joining us for today's episode. We hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you next week.